It's always been in the ancient times, the writing techniques were not evolved. So the people used to remember the things and used to pass it on to the next generation, that knowledge of wisdom through the stories. That's why the stories they were invented, and I have seen the technique which is used in Vedic mathematics. Vedic mathematicians today, how they learn big numbers, how they learn a series of numbers, they are taught to make a story out of it. While you make a story out of it, you got to remember that particular knowledge out of it. In Sanatan, in Hinduism, Dr. Raj Vedam, he mentioned the story of 27 wives of moon. The scriptures, because they were written down much later, and those scriptures are based on the knowledge they just received from their ancestors, from their gurus. Many more things, newer things, they just came up and were added later on. The Rohini, one of the nakshatras, where moon gets closer most of the time while it comes up in the skies. So that way, it's like mentioned in the story that his father-in-law was upset with his this kind of nature, that he spends most of his time with one daughter and not with the rest of the daughters. So that way you remember that, just out of the story you remember the whole this astronomical phenomenon. And that way is in most of the scriptures the stories are built and they have been passed on to generations. And in Hinduism it is told, it's not like the Westerners, like where they keep on hiding it because of the competition. They used to say, spread the knowledge, spread the gyan. As much as you spread it, gyan increases. The amount of gyan increases. When you say that moon has 27 wives and you are telling it to somebody else, this is the knowledge about the moon. When you are passing it on to somebody else, you know the story. But at the time of telling it to the next person, so you're not going to make it 28 because you know that it is related to the moon. So that's why it remains there. That number remains intact for thousands of years, even it doesn't change. These are the eternal numbers. Though it has been devised in the form of a story, but it's about an eternal value. But that eternal value was studied by the rishis, the scientists, the Indian ancient scientists. Well, friends, as I always say, facts, the truth need not to be defended. So please spread the message, share the video, give a thumbs up, like it, and comment in the comment section, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Namaste.
Take you to a very magical time, again in India, a magical time when the moon married the 27 daughters of King Daksha. Well, if you're the moon and you lived in those times, you could get away with polygamy, but don't try it today. So the story goes that each day the moon would visit one of his wives. However, his father-in-law, King Daksha, got word that the moon favors one of his wives called Rohini much more than the other wives. And he was furious with his son-in-law. How could he treat his daughters not equally? So he was furious with him. And so he cursed his son-in-law, but then the moon managed to go and plead with the god Mahadeva, and he got a boon from him, and as a result of which, he was condemned to a life of waxing and waning. Now, this enchanting story has encoded both complex as well as simple astronomical facts. Let me explain. The ancient Indians had observed that each day the moon rises in the east at a different time, and therefore against a different backdrop of the skies and stars. They also observed that it took approximately 27 days for the moon to return to the same backdrop of the sky and stars. So they decided to divide the 360-degree sphere into 27 sections. Now, it's not enough to just divide it into sections. You also need to be able to recognize these sections. So what they did is they decided to they looked for the brightest stars in each of these sections, and they named each of the stars for one of the wives of the moons. These were the nakshatras. Nakshatras are loosely translated as the lunar mansions. So the 27 nakshatra model is exactly that. So see, this is a very, very powerful mnemonic that the ancients evolved, where using the mnemonics of the moon's wife's name, they could come out and look at the night sky and recognize the principal stars in it, as well as associate them with the phases of the moon, and thus mark the passage of time. This mechanism of passage of time has been used in India for an exceedingly long period of time, even to present times when you mark the occurrence of festivals using such a lunar calendar. So we are no closer to addressing the story of why did the moon favor Rohini, and I'd like to come to that. The ancients had observed that in its path over the ecliptic is the imaginary line from the east to the west, across which celestial bodies like the moon, the sun, and the constellations go. They had noticed that when the moon goes across ecliptic, sometimes it covers a principal star, and sometimes it just comes close but does not cover a principal star. So there is a technical name for this. It is called a lunar occultation. The ancients had observed that this occultation sometimes happens with some principal stars and not with others, and they also observed a periodicity. They observed a periodicity of 19 years, which today we call a Matin cycle. So it turns out that today with our studies, we know that if a principal star is located between 4 degrees and 6 degrees from the ecliptic, then it experiences a cluster of lunar occultations over a 4-year period, which repeats all over after 19 years. If the principal star is located greater than 6 degrees from the ecliptic, then it does not experience any occultation. I know that sounds very technical, but really speaking, these are very simple observational things that you can do. If you read a star almanac or if you read an astronomy magazine and get to know about an impending lunar occultation, all you need to do is go to the appointed time, look at the night sky, and you can make a naked eye observation of some of this phenomena. So I did all of these things to try and understand this Indian story of why did the moon favor nakshatra Rohini over all the other nakshatras? Well, it turns out that Rohini is the star that in Arabic is called Aldebaran. So today we know them by the familiar name Aldebaran. Rohini is located at 5 degrees from the ecliptic. What does it mean? It means that Rohini is going to experience a cluster of occultations over a 4-year period that repeats all over after 19 years. Well, I counted in the latest cluster is from 2015, ending this year in 2018, I counted 49 occultations of Aldebaran or Rohini with the moon. This is far greater than the number of occultations that the moon has had with any other nakshatra or principal stars. Not only had the ancients observed the phenomena of occultation, not only had they also looked at the frequency and called out how often each is occulted, they had also noticed that Rohini was occulted the most and preserved that observational wisdom in an easy to remember story of the moon and his wives and how he loved Rohini more than the others. So isn't it amazing? Such a simple, complex astronomical phenomena encoded in a simple idiom that is unfortunately easily dismissed as a silly myth. So the next time that any of you hear anybody dismissing an ancient story as a myth, do ask them to pause and reflect. They could be spurning millennia of wisdom that is encoded in the story. Thank you for listening to my stories.